The OnlyFans empire is collapsing. I don't think that would be happening anytime soon because Lust is very profitable. But let's watch and see. Video by Aloudy, make sure to check him out. Video link would be in the description.
Currently, the media space has been dominated by how much some top earners are making on OnlyFans. But what hasn't really been discussed is how the company has lost billions of dollars in valuation in a very short amount of time. And things just got even more messy because is now in a very bad situation after the CEO passed away. So essentially, you have one of the biggest platforms in the world, especially when it comes to that profitability per employee metric that you've probably seen online. And they just lost the one person running it, and almost nobody knew who he really was and that he existed. So the dude never gave interviews. There's really no real footage of him online. And one of the only pictures of him online was the one from his LinkedIn that had no ties to the platform whatsoever. So that's a little bit interesting. But for years, he was quietly making billions running one of the most controversial platforms on the internet. But then in just the last month, he passed away and left the entire business in limbo.
I want to go back and see the profitability chart because it looks interesting. Oh my God. It has 46 employees running a $7 billion operation. YouTube, which owns basically everything on the internet, makes $1.9 million per employee. OnlyFans makes $37 million per employee. Crazy numbers. And that's not even a competition. The most profitable platform per employee on the internet is one that the entire financial world refuses to publicly associate with. And that's why profit doesn't equal respect. And in business, sometimes respect is worth more than money.
So, I mean, to catch everyone up to speed here, OF was created in 2016 by a guy named Tim Stokely. He was the youngest kid in a family from Essex, England. And he spent years trying to launch internet business after internet business and had a whole lot of failures. And the guy burned through a whole bunch of his own money and goodwill from friends and family, to put it lightly. But his dad, Guy, real name by the way, he watched multiple projects go essentially nowhere and had funded more than a few of them. So when Tim came back with yet another idea, he went, okay, here's 10,000 pounds, and that's the last one I'm funding. Little did he know though, that money became the seed funds. And the original structure was simple.
Shit.
Creators set a monthly price, subscribers paid it, and the platform keeps 20%. And I guess the creator walks away with 80%. Tim's original pitch wasn't necessarily focused on adult content, but the idea had been open to anyone who could build a paying audience, including adult creators since 2017.
So OnlyFans pitches itself as an open platform for any creator to build a paying audience. And this is why when you build an audience platform without hard boundaries, it will always drift into the most financially motivated content every single time. It's funny that the platform started with the broadest creative vision for creators, and it permanently became associated with one specific type of content, and the platform cannot escape it, even if it tries. You can tell creators that they shouldn't do that type of content, but telling them and setting a boundary is two different things. The platform does not define the content defines the platform.
And from the start, it was a family operation in the early days, with Tim's brother, Tom, running the operations and their father, Guy, handling the finances. Guy, I guess, was just their guy and father. And that one group, I guess they figured out the model faster than anyone else. And that showed up in some serious numbers because in 2018, the platform was getting tracked, running headfirst into some structural problems. The payment processors that made it possible to, actually collect the money from the subscribers weren't a big fan of the adult side of their business. And obviously, no payment processing means no business, full stop. So Tim sold it. And the buyer was someone that almost nobody had heard of, and nobody would really hear of him for many years to come. His name was Leonid Ravinsky, who was born in Odessa, Ukraine in 1982. His family relocated to Chicago while he was still a kid, and he studied economics at Northwestern University and graduated in 2002. And from that point forward, he essentially built an entire career at, scaling internet companies while keeping his name almost completely out of circulation. And even after he became the owner of one of the most talked about platforms on the planet, a single photo of him made the rounds, the same one over and over, which was attached to a LinkedIn profile that described him as the president at leo.com and, completely left OF out of the picture. So essentially what we know about this guy is he lived in a $19 million waterfront property in Miami, but he gave 0 interviews. He made no public statements. He was, I guess, for every practical purpose, someone someone who did not want to be found. What he was always doing, however, was running his own things, and he'd been building internet businesses since he was a teenager. And by his mid-20s, he'd built and operated more than 10 websites, developing a deep understanding in, I guess, the mechanics of adult content or entertainment, and how that whole payment structure works and how he can get that to work without getting banned. And since he understood how this industry worked, when he was presented with the chance to buy, he did so in 2018 for $30 million. And it's safe to say that was a phenomenal investment for him, because in 2019, the platform processed around $300 million in total payments and cleared around $7 million in profit. Then a year later, that gross payment volume hit $2.2 billion. Then by 2021, it was approaching $5 billion.
Okay, so this guy has been doing the shadow walk behind the scenes. That just shows you that silence is a strategy. Fame and wealth are not the same thing. The ones you never hear about are often the ones winning the hardest. But in this case, he was winning but doing damage to a lot of people. But to simply put this into perspective of how much damage it's done, it's a chain reaction. The owner invested in this platform. The creator can put whatever they want in it. It has no boundaries. And in the end, we have the consumers. And the consumers are the people with the power. The platform would go bankrupt if everyone stopped consuming that type of content for a while.
But the company files with the UK as required, but Leonid had no interest in turning any of these numbers into some massive press release like many other entrepreneurs would. But then came that moment that probably told you more about OF than anything else, because in August of 2021, the platform announced that it was going to ban explicit content. Now, that was confusing to a lot of people, because that kind of sounds like if Burger King announced it was going to stop selling burgers. So why would they ever do that? Well, it makes sense a little bit later on when you get the full picture. But obviously, the response from the creators on their platform was immediate and very clear. So 6 days later, the ban was reversed, and I guess that just showed the creators that they're the product. They actually have the power here of this platform.
Yeah, man, when your product is the people, you don't own the platform, they do. The moment you forget that, they be sure as hell to remind you. Because some people get used to that type of easy money. Someone who creates content in that platform is basically living life on easy mode. But don't get it twisted, because the damage that you do to yourself and the people as someone who creates content in that platform, it drains your energy. And the content creators there be like, oh, what am I gonna do today? Let me film myself doing this and that. I don't want to say explicit stuff right here, but you know what I mean. Put it on the platform, 500 to 1,000 goons will subscribe immediately. And that kind of way of making money is addictive. Addictive as fuck.
The reason all this actually matters becomes a whole lot more clear once you look at the numbers, though. Because in 2024, they processed $7.2 billion in total transactions between the fans and the creators. OF's cut of that was about 20%, and that came out to $1.41 billion in net revenue. That is a behemoth of a company. But after expenses, pre-tax profit landed at $684 million, with the entire operation ran by only 46 full-time employees. That is insane. And then Leonid's personal payouts track the platform's growth as you would pretty much expect, because in 2021, he collected around $284 million. In 2022, he collected $338 million. In 2023, he collected $472 million. And then in 2024, he collected $701 million, which works out to about $2 million per day every day for the entire year, which means the total earnings pulled between 2021 and 2024 were just under $1.8 billion from a company that he paid roughly $30 million for. That might be one of the best investments of all time. But at the same time, the distribution between the creators is wildly uneven, because, you know, you have this whole notion where a bunch of people would start an OF and make a whole bunch of money. But for the most part, that's not true. It's very similar to how Twitch is in a way. I don't really like drawing comparisons between Twitch and but you know, you have a handful of top streamers on Twitch that make a crazy amount of money, and then the average streamer makes way below minimum wage. And that's the case with as well. But I mean, that's just a whole nother topic for itself. But the thing is, by 2025, Leonid was looking for a buyer. And it didn't take long for him to realize, selling this platform is going to be a challenge. Because on paper, I mean, the investment is insane. Over $1.4 billion in annual net revenue, profit margins that most businesses would consider borderline unbelievable, roughly 380 million registered users, and fewer than 50 people on payroll. If you strip the context and handed someone the financial statements, they would assume they were looking at some sort of tech unicorn that had figured out everything. However, the context is the biggest problem here, because a large portion of the institutional investors, the ones with the actual capital to do a deal at this scale, they operate under something called vice clauses, which are restrictions embedded in their agreements with their own backers that prevent them from putting money into certain categories. Because often, I mean, these firms don't only use their own money, they have liquidity providers or people who invest money into them, and they operate as a hedge fund, and then they deploy other people's money with the end goal of, beating the S&P 500 in an annual return. And a lot of people just don't want their funds to go into, investing in these vice businesses, which considers adult content, tobacco, gambling, and weapons. So regardless of the numbers, a lot of the most obvious buyers are essentially blocked from even writing the check. Then you have the operational risks, which are, Visa and MasterCard. They've already shown that they could, threaten to cut off payment processing for adult platforms. And this is exactly what pushed OF towards its failed 2021 ban. And since the platform is almost entirely reliant on subscription revenue, it has to go through payment processors that take somewhere between 5 to 10% in fees on top of the 2 to 3% fees from the most regular, Visa and Master, which is far above the usual 2 to 3% that most regular businesses are charged from payment processors.
Yeah, that kind of profit throughout the year, $684 million with only 50 employees, is an investor dream on paper. But as he said, the biggest institutional money in the world are contractually blocked from investing in adult content platforms. The most profitable platform per employee on the internet is essentially unbuyable by the people with enough money to buy it. And that tells you that you can build the most profitable business in the world and still be stuck. The exit strategy matters from day one, not just how you build it, but how you eventually get out.
So obviously that is a tax on their margins, and now they're dependent to payment processors. And not only that, but there's also a regulatory pressure. So the UK communications regulator, they hit with a £1.4 million fine in early 2025 for a weak age verification practice, which, might not be the biggest deal for them financially, but it's a pretty clear sign of where this enforcement is going. And then you have that exit problem, because even if someone bought it, how do they eventually sell it? Like, taking it public through a stock market listing, that's essentially impossible under the current conditions. And there's also no obvious second buyer standing by, and the insane financials don't resolve the fact that this is an asset most people in finance don't really want to be publicly associated with. And I mean, if I was to guess, that might be one of the reasons why they tried to stop allowing adult content on their platform back in 2021, plus the whole payment processors problem. So the asking price of the platform started at about $8 billion, and no one was interested, despite their insanely high valuation. But the firm that eventually emerged as, I guess, the most serious buyer was Architect Capital, a San Francisco-based investment fund that got its start in 2020, providing credit to Latin American startups. And they had more recently become known for its tendency towards complicated situations, because its founder, James Sagan, was one of the larger investors in Juul, a, vaping and nicotine product that you guys are probably familiar with at this point. And honestly, that's just a whole nother video, because Juul completely took over the world like right before the pandemic, and it definitely did extremely well during the pandemic. And then it seems like it kind of got like banned, at least most of their flavors got banned. And then suddenly you had like Geek Bars and all these other like off-brand versions of Juul, which arguably are worse, that kind of took over everything. But yeah, long story, but essentially Juul had its products pulled by the shelves by the FDA, and they later settled more than $1 billion in lawsuits over allegations that it was being marketed towards teenagers. So I mean, it's safe to say that Architect's brand has some tolerance for risky investments. And the pitch Sagan made to the potential backers had two core ideas. First, diversify the platform, push it towards mainstream creator niches, and try to make it competitive with something like Patreon, rather than positioning it as purely an adult content site. Obviously, OF is primarily an adult content platform, and the majority of the traffic and subscriptions and the money all comes from that. And without that core, it would just be a minor player when it comes to, like, you know, competing in the space with YouTube, Patreon, and Spotify. And now that Spotify also added long form content and subscription models. But I feel like it might even be smaller than Rumble if they tried to play in the non-adult space. Over the years, OF has genuinely been trying to build a safe for work community on the platform, including chefs, athletes, musicians, comedians, and fitness coaches. And they also launched their own safe for work streaming service called OFTV back in 2021. And they've actively been trying to pursue other partnerships since. But I don't really think any of it really took off, though that is, again, still such a tiny portion of what actually is.
I don't think no one can rebrand a platform to attract the mainstream buyers, especially if that platform is already branded by one specific type of content. If you ever try to rebrand, build something new with a new name. You cannot renovate a reputation. You can only build a new one.
Then you have, you know, the real competitors here, YouTube, Spotify, and Patreon. They don't allow any 18 plus content. And I don't see a world where OF is actually able to compete with any of these platforms in the safer work space because, you know, the stigma that comes with the name. It's just like, I don't know. I just can't see most creators being very inclined to be like, hey guys, follow my unless they're paid like a massive bag. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. But that problem will be something the new owner will have to inherit. And another step that they might need to do is acquire a banking license, because even if they acquire OF, what happens if the payment processors shut them off? That would be really bad. So a potential solution for that would be if the platform could become its own financial institution. I mean, in theory, it could. That would definitely be a massive uphill battle for them though. But that would at least help them reduce the 5 to 10% fee burden. Currently, the valuation on the table is $3.5 billion, with Architect taking 60% of the equity in the deal. So in just a few years, this has essentially lost $4.5 billion in valuation because no one wants to buy it. And the Wall Street Journal had originally reported a total deal value, including debt, at $5.5 billion, compared to an earlier $8 billion valuation just 1 year before, with slower growth and tougher sale process dragging the number down. And this number was apparently dragged down due to slower growth and just a tough sales process. But Sagan's $500 million fund wasn't nearly large enough to cover a deal of this size on its own. So he spent months going door to door trying to assemble the capital. And the family offices turned out to be the most receptive audience, largely because they don't really face the same restrictions that prevent more of the, you know, mainstream funds from joining. And the deal was supposed to close by the end of March of this year. But then Leonid passed away, and everything just got way more complicated. Obviously, I don't want to sound disrespectful here, but terrible time. Just when everything seemed to align, he passed away. And this happened on March 20th, 2026 in Florida. And the platform made an announcement with a brief statement saying that he had passed away peacefully after a long battle with cancer, but his family asked for privacy and no details were shared.
You gotta understand that all of us eventually are gonna die. No amounts of money makes you immune to being a human. Money solves financial problems, but it creates entirely new ones at a different scale. That's why you should build smart and plan your exit.
But what came out in the following days were how few people actually knew about how serious his condition was. And sources told the media that Leonid himself had driven the urgency behind the sale because of his health. Because the guy was apparently trying to get a deal closed specifically because he was concerned about leaving his family in a complicated situation without clear ownership. And as a part of that, in 2024, he transferred his stake of the company into a private trust, with his family being the expected beneficiaries. So obviously, if the deal with Architect Capital was already messy, it just got so much worse. Because the firm was still in the process of raising the equity it needed when Leonid passed. So it seems like the money simply just wasn't fully there. And suddenly now, investors who've been on the fence were dealing with a whole new layer of issues. Now you have estate laws, a different person now effectively in control of the asset, and deal terms that would now have to be renegotiated with a trust rather than the original seller. So the timeline that was already extended was pushed back once again. And as of this video, the deal remains open, and the future of OnlyFans right now is genuine uncertain, which is why it seems like the OnlyFans empire is collapsing. And the company has a current CEO. His name is Kelly Blair, who has been running the day-to-day operations, but what's clear is there's a lot of money at stake, a lot of different interests, and a company that, despite everything working against it, keeps printing cash at a rate that makes it very hard to ignore. So, I mean, it's safe to say whatever happens next will probably not be any more bizarre than the story of this company. I mean, the company's story is how a $10,000 loan from a dad with way too much patience suddenly turned into a $7 billion a year empire ran by some secret Ukrainian billionaire no one has ever heard of. I mean, come on, this is such a crazy story. And I feel like this is just a situation that no one's been talking about, because every time I hear OF in the news, it's about one of their stars making like $1 bazillion a year.
Yeah, man, as I said at the beginning of this video, lust is very profitable. But if you want to operate as a businessman, you should always stay silent and execute. Build your exit strategy before you need it. And never build something so tied to you personally that it cannot survive without you. Because eventually it will have to.